I was 13 and watched this terrible movie called Catch That Kid, which is like the Italian Job for high schoolers, right? 3 kids rob a bank and they escape on go-karts. But I remember watching this movie and being like, and seeing this quite cute guy driving really fast with a lot of money. And I thought, that's what I want to do with my life.
My name is I am the Acting Executive Retail Editor and Events Director at Condé Nast Traveller. I'm very excited to be joined now by Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Yassmin trained as a mechanical engineer and worked on oil and gas rigs around Australia for years before becoming a writer and broadcaster in 2016. She published her debut memoir, Yassmin's Story, with Penguin Random House at age 24 and followed up with her first fiction book for younger readers, You Must Be Layla, in 2019. Yassmin's critically acclaimed essays have been published in numerous anthologies, including the Griffin Review, the best-selling It's Not About the Burqa, and The New Daughters of Africa. Hello, Yassmin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
What inspires you? You've already achieved so much, and you strike me as someone who's got so much drive and energy. And I was wondering what it is that keeps you going.
I think there are lots of different things in different moments, but for me, there are probably a couple of core aspects to it. One is a big part of who I am comes from my faith, right? I'm Muslim, and I think that gives me an external sense of motivation and a kind of, my mum always said to me, like, God has given you gifts and opportunities in this world, and one day you'll be asked, what did you do with those? And so for me, part of the motivation also comes from wanting to make sure that I do the absolute most with what I've been given, because so much of it is outside my control, right? I didn't get to choose where I was born or where my parents migrated to, there are so many things that happen by chance, and so what is within my control, it's to make the most of that. And also, I'm just really curious. I'm really curious about the world. I love having adventures. I'm someone who, wants to know what it's like to be in a different context. I want to know what it's like to live in an oil rig in the middle of the ocean. I want to know what it's like to drive really, really fast around a racetrack. I just want to have these adventures. And I think that sense of curiosity and discovery is in everything that I do.
So you studied mechanical engineering, where you also developed a passion for Formula One racing. Is that correct?
Yeah. I fell in love with racing before I started university. I was 13 and I watched this terrible movie called Catch That Kid, which is like the Italian Job for high schoolers, right? 3 kids rob a bank and they escape on go-karts. But I remember watching this movie and being like, and seeing this quite cute guy driving really fast with a lot of money. And I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. Like, I want to drive really fast with a lot of money. And, and obviously the natural thought was then I should become a Formula One driver. Not quite. Like, my parents were like not super supportive of this passion, because they were like, we would have to mortgage a house. And do you even know how to drive? No. So I decided at that point that I would get into designing cars, and that was the path into mechanical engineering. And then once I kind of got into it, I fell in love with the entire world of racing and motorsport. And I ran the university's race car team, and I designed the chassis, and I learned to weld, and it was awesome. And I really genuinely thought that that's what I was going to do with my life.
Did you learn to drive?
Oh yeah, I learned to drive as soon as I possibly could. My dad wouldn't let me learn in school because he thought it would distract me from my studies, which he probably was right about, let's be honest.
Well, but yeah, you were very dedicated to your studies. I mean, you obviously aced school, went through it really well, and then ended up on oil and gas rigs. So what was it like? I have this vision of you in the middle of an ocean. What was existing in that environment like for you?
In many ways, it is like you would imagine, right? Like, I would be in a helicopter with these big, sound muffling earmuffs on. with a bunch of people I'd never met, you know, from all parts of Australia and all parts of the world. And you would like, one of my favorite kind of moments is when the chopper sort of like comes around the rig and you are in the sky and you can see the helipad that you're going to land on. And you're like, oh, there's my home for the next month. Right? What's going to happen? Who knows? And one of my favorite things to do on the rig was to go up to the helideck because it's quite a high kind of part of the platform. And you can sit on the helideck or walk around it and you get like a 360-degree view of the ocean. And the rigs that I worked on off the coast of Western Australia tended to be quite far out. So they were like 3 hours helicopter from the shore. So to the point where if I got on the internet, Netflix would not think that I was in Australia. Like they'd be like, oh, you're actually in Singaporean waters or something like that. Like I was always like, I'm not in Singapore, Netflix. Let me watch the thing.
How did you pass your time on these rigs? Because was there a great sense of community, or did you feel lonely? How was it?
Yes and no. When I was on, so I started out on land rigs, smaller land rigs in Australia, and they tended to have like, 30 or 40 guys. And in a way, the land rigs are kind of like more the wild, wild west, right? Because they're a bit smaller, they're a bit cheaper, they're a bit dirtier. When you go offshore, it's like $1 million, $1.5 million a day just to run the rig, right? So it's a big operation. And so it's a lot more professionalized. And yes, there is a kind of sense of like camaraderie in a sense. But at the same time, especially for me, like I was in my early 20s, I was like a young Muslim Sudanese girl. So I was never going to be like one of the guys, but I always tried to find a way to fit. And sometimes when I tell these stories, I'm like, am I just looking back with rose tinted glasses? Like, was it actually like the day to day was like, oh God, I've got to wake up for night shift. Is so-and-so going to pay attention and listen to what I actually have to tell them? I'm so exhausted. The thing's not working. But I think there's definitely a sense of every day was an adventure and every day something could happen. And not that many people get to live this life. And I think that always was like the moment that I decided that maybe things would be different. I remember I had a really tough week on the rig, and I went to my sort of like dorm room and I sat outside my room, and there's like a little grating area and a little balcony and out to the ocean. And I remember sitting on the chair outside my room looking out to the ocean and being like, what am I doing here? Like, how did I end up in the middle of the ocean? Like, and also nobody has told me to be here. Like, I have made the decision to be here. There is no one forcing me to be here. So like any struggle is my personal choice. And that moment, I remember thinking back at that moment being like, oh, I'm here because I want to be here. And if I don't want to be here anymore for whatever reason, like I can make that choice as well. And there was something really beautiful in kind of fully owning the kind of wildness of that moment.
I think that's something that's quite, when I speak to explorers and people who've been to the most remote places on the planet, a common thing seems to be the way that you phrase it in your mind. So the way the thought structure you give it can either give you the sense to continue and be empowered, or to just give up. And I think that's what separates so many people who've really succeeded from those who haven't. And it's surprising because so much of it is not physical, it's psychological.
I can really believe that.
So you have also traveled, I mean, you've traveled for work, and then after that, you've written 2 books and been on book tours. With all your travels, where has been the place that surprised you the most?
I think I've got a couple of answers to that question. One is last year, for the first time, I went to a post-Soviet country. I went to Georgia, which is near Russia. And I'd never been, I've been around the world a lot, fortunately. Alhamdulillah, I've been very fortunate, but I'd never been to a post-Soviet country before. And my partner speaks Russian, and it was so fascinating to experience a country that had a genuinely different history to anything I'd ever known, and I think there is something really fascinating about that, and being like, oh, there are things that are so similar, about like relationships with empire or an imperial history or something like that. But also, I don't know anything about that. And like all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, there is an entire culture and history and country that I know nothing about. And how wonderful is that? So I think that was really surprising to me. Yeah.
What did you take from it? Was it a sense of optimism? Was it, what did you feel?
I felt a sense of, the word that comes to mind is vastness, because I think that, again, if you travel a lot, you can tend to think of the world as very small, and everything so like similar, but almost in a way that there's almost an arrogance to it. You're like, oh yeah, I can navigate anywhere. Like it's fine. I've been to lots of places, of course, but to go somewhere that's so fundamentally different, with the language and even the script is so far beyond anything I'd seen before. You're like, oh wow, there is still so much to know, so much to discover. And that for me was delicious. I don't know, that's the word that comes to mind.
And where else? You said there's a couple of places. I want to know.
Yeah. The other place that comes to mind is and I'm trying to remember because I want to get it right. So I was really lucky to, through my work when I was book touring, travel all across Australia. And some of the places that I thought were the most incredible were places where I got to connect with the Indigenous history in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I went to a place called Kununurra, which, if I'm getting it right, is like on the border of Northern Territory and Western Australia. And it's like so far from everything that I know and from your nearest big city and that kind of thing. But not only is it beautiful, like the just the nature and the natural habitat is gorgeous, but also the First Nations people that live there still have a relationship with the land that is so old and so historic. And because it's further away from, where Europeans colonized, they were able to maintain more of that. And there is just something so incredible about a culture that has maintained tens of thousands of years of continuous civilization. And I mean, I'm just in awe of it, I think, and in awe of this relationship with the land that is actually unlike anything that we know in the Western modern sense. Like the way somebody explained to me that it's not that just, Indigenous people feel connected to the land, but the land is part of them in a way that like belies our modern language. And that, to me, again, when you get a moment like that shows you a whole different way of thinking about things, I think is very humbling.
And that sense of connectivity as well, not just with each other, but with the environment that you're living in, which is something that I think we're all missing right now as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And so what is it that you enjoy most about travel?
It's such a interesting time to ask me that as well, since I've not left, London or my house really for like 2 months.
Everyone's wishful thinking.
Right. And it's funny because I think once I graduated university, I don't think I've like stayed in one place for more than a month, right? Like I'm always on the move. And I think, to me, being on the move there's something energizing about constantly being on the move. And like, yes, the flip side is it can be a bit exhausting, but it means that there is always excitement. There is, always something happening. There is always, new people that you're going to meet. You don't know what's going to be around the corner. Like I met my partner literally at a party where he was like, hey, I just got paid and I really want to go to Morocco. Who wants to go to Morocco? I'm buying tickets for 4 people to go to Morocco. And I was like, yes, sweet, I want to go to Morocco. And that's how we met. Like I'd never spoken to the guy before, So like for me, there's possibility in the idea of travel and the idea of just anything can happen. I don't know. It doesn't sound that deep, but I think it is an intoxicating sense and feeling.
I think the change is the kind of change that you're talking about, not just going away for a week to a beach or something, but the kind of change where you're actually moving every couple of years is a real challenge, and keeping yourself, slightly frightened almost by giving yourself that challenge kind of makes you progress, I think.
You don't get too comfortable.
Yeah.
Like you're right, actually, and I've not really thought about it, but I've moved cities like every 2-ish years. And there is something when you look at a place with new eyes.
And then when you travel, do you prefer to travel in a group or alone?
I think there's something really fun about traveling in a group, but I've done most of my travel on my own. And I think when I think of what I enjoy most about exploring and traveling, doing it on my own gives me the space to do that in a way that traveling in a group doesn't. Traveling in a group is about the group. It's less about the travel, yes. I think. Whereas when you're on your own, you get time to think, you get space. And it's also such a unique type of space to think, because you are in liminal space, right? You're in transition. You're going from one place to another. And so you're not anchored to all the things that you might be anchored to in your home or in your destination. You've got this transitory moment of possibility where anything could happen.
So with all your travel experience, are you a very good flyer? Are you good at getting yourself together to the airport and
Yeah, I've definitely missed quite a few flights in my time. I will very happily admit to that. I'm just alarm clocks,
just don't work.
Just the one thing though is, alhamdulillah, touch wood, I've never missed a work flight. Like, that's not true. I've never missed an oil rig work flight. I've never missed my helicopter to the rig. There have been moments where I've missed like a flight to a speaking event, but my agent doesn't know about that, so we're not going to talk about that.
So tell me about flying as well, because from an engineering background, do you experience flying in a different way? Are you passionate about it? Is that something you'd like to master?
I think I would love to learn to fly. I think there's definitely something that I get out of, and this might sound strange, but being in relationship with machine that is unlike anything else. When you know how something works and you know how it responds to you, and you know how to kind of make it do the thing that you want it to do, whether that's on a bike or in a car or on a plane, it's a very incredible feeling, because it's almost like you're extended out and your body can now do all these things that it couldn't possibly do. But beyond that, I think my little brother works in aerospace, or in sort of more like flying related mechanical engineering. He also did mechanical engineering. So I was always the road person, and he was the plane person. But I do think that, like, I don't know, I just love machines, and I love the possibility in them. And I do love, am I going to commit to this line? I think there is something pretty cool about an airport. I've been in lots of airports in lots of different places around the world, but again, it's like, oh, cool, something's going to happen, right? Like, an airport is a place of possibility.
That anticipation of the destination. Do you ever get nervous flying? Because I ask this because, coming from a scientific background where you understand how to control something, what is it like for you sitting in a machine someone else is operating? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I actually think that, like, I feel almost safer in an aircraft than I do any other machine, because I know that, like, the aerospace industry is one of the most regulated and, like, high performance industries across the world, right? Like, the oil industry always looks to the aircraft industry as an example of a really high performing industry. And so, like, and I also know the number of engineers that have to look at something. To be honest, that's why the Boeing stuff was so outrageous. Like when there was a couple of planes people might know, Boeing planes that had issues, and when you listen to reports about what happened, and you listen to engineers and folks working in the factories who were like, we called this out, there was a problem in the process. Like, to me, that makes perfect sense, because if you don't follow the process that you've created, you're gonna have problems. But also, as an engineer, my inclination is to be like, let's trust in the process, like follow the process and it will work. That's what it's for.
Yeah. And my next question I wanted to ask you is about writing, because you've already written 2 books. Your latest one is fiction, You Must Be Layla. What does writing mean to you?
I actually started to write when I was on the rigs, like in a more formal sense. So I've been writing ever since I was a kid. I, have the terrible diaries of a 10-year-old. It's like, so-and-so looked at me, I'm so in love. But it wasn't until I started working on the rigs, and actually it was that sense of feeling so isolated, even though I was surrounded by people, and having no one to talk to, and so therefore wanting to make sense of the world around me. So I started to write. I started to find ways to express and to process what was happening. And off the back of that, somebody was like, you should definitely write more about living on rigs, like it's quite interesting. And I was like, no, I'm an engineer, nobody's going to be interested in my writing. But I wrote this essay about working on the rigs, and the rest is history. And to me, it's been really interesting to observe my relationship with writing and with creativity change over time, because I think for a long time my identity was really attached to the idea of being an engineer and being a technical person, and like writing was like this other strange humanities thing that I, couldn't possibly engage with or relate to in a serious way. But over time, as I've moved further away from my, day-to-day engineering work and immerse myself, like now what I do every day is I get up and I write, and sometimes I procrastinate more than I write, but that's what I spend most of my time doing now. It has now become, I guess, not only a way for me to figure things out and to process my own ideas, but also a space for me to be curious and to experiment, and in a way a place for me to play around with those same concepts that I get out of traveling, which is, oh my God, anything's possible, right? Like, I control these characters. I can make them do anything. I can make them go anywhere. And that's so exciting. Like, how fun is that? We get to make our own worlds.
And with your latest book, did your teenage diaries come in handy? Because you were writing from the start of a young lady.
Yes, yeah. So Layla's a 13. Yeah, Layla's a 13-year-old girl who gets a scholarship to a fancy private school, and that's, I was just a young girl who got a scholarship to a fancy private school and had to figure things out. So definitely, there are characters in that book that are based off versions of people that I went to school with, and
they'll all be reading moments now. Which one's me?
So definitely, and I think so I'm now writing the sequel for it, which is really exciting. But what's really interesting is, like, You Must Be Layla, I kind of had the advantage of being like, oh, this is a character that I know, insofar as maybe she was a version of me, but now I'm taking her into a new world and developing her beyond into her own, like, it's no longer just baby Yassmin, it's like Layla, and what is Layla going to do in this context, and how is she going to, develop and change and grow? So yeah, it is a fun new challenge.
And are you managing to do much writing during lockdown?
So yeah, I think that, like, in my mind I was going to be super productive, and I have like bits and spurts.
So it's like off the chart.
It's like, I gotta do everything. It's funny too, because when lockdown started, I was like, it's gonna be fine, we don't have to be productive. But now it's like, oh, the entire year might be lockdown, so I'm gonna have to do something. And I have found that, like, rather than assuming that I'll be able to do things in the same way that I used to. What I have to do is figure out what works for the context I'm in now. And it doesn't look the same it doesn't look the same every day. Like some days sitting at this desk is great. Some days I need to be, on the couch. Some days I need to go outside for a walk and think about it and talk it out loud before I can, come down and write. And also I think that the most challenging bit has been focus, and it's quite strange because there's not that much to distract me, but I almost became a barrister. I was looking for a distraction so hard that I was like, maybe I'll start a new career as a barrister. And then I was like, oh wait, I don't actually find the law that interesting, so what am I doing? But but you find ways to distract yourself.
That's like, even the way you procrastinate is like the most extreme version. Like, I'll just go make a cup of coffee.
I don't want to mislead anyone. There's been a lot of Netflix watching and a lot of TikTok. Like, let's also add that into the mix, just to be honest with people.
Okay, so I also want to talk about acting. So this is another thing that you've done. Do you find there's much of a crossover between acting and writing, putting yourself into someone else's shoes?
I would actually say I find more of a crossover in acting and sort of public speaking and the kind of like advocacy work that I've done. So I've traveled a lot around the world speaking to different companies and organizations and so on. And that process is a process of getting up on stage and becoming a version of yourself for a particular reason. And, it's not the same as acting because it is a version of myself and it's very clearly me. But I think what it is like a belief in your right to take up that space, right? And it was really hit home to me when I did this acting course at the end of last year, and one of the teachers was like, if you don't think that you deserve to be on that stage, why are you there? Like, you have to believe that you deserve to take up that space. You are the right person to take up that space. You are the right person to play. Like, you have to back yourself. And I think that advice works for so many things, but especially for acting, when you have to really believe, because there are so many people that want to act, right? There are like so many, and there are so many different things that come into deciding whether or not you're going to get that role or get the opportunity. So it's a tough gig. So you really have to back yourself. And that is, I think that's a pretty incredible and brave and courageous thing. So it definitely gave me a lot more, getting into that space and understanding like how much rejection actors have to deal with and so on. It gave me a lot more empathy for folks who choose to make that their life career.
Yeah, it's pretty brave. But I think being brave is something that you do on a regular basis. I mean, you have been so brave with the work that you've done as well. And I know you're doing a project with LinkedIn. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so it's really exciting. I've just been able to announce a partnership with LinkedIn as one of their 7 change makers. So they're working with 7 of us who are all advocates and activists around a particular theme. And my kind of challenge for the 12 months is to work around beating unconscious bias. And it's like such a, it's such a nice, simple phrase, beating unconscious bias. And really within it contains quite a lot of really tough work, right? Because it's around like, how do we actually create inclusive and equitable workplaces? Like, that's really hard. We've got to peel that back and be like, where are these biases coming from? What's going on here? How do we, get into the nitty gritty? And so I'm hoping to take, I'll be writing on LinkedIn and sharing videos and content and so on over the next 12 months, and really hoping to take people on a journey to be like, okay, I know you've heard of unconscious bias. You probably, may have a little bit of familiarity with it, but let's take you on a journey, right? So that not only do we start with unconscious bias, but we get to a point where you are now like a transformative leader. And that's really exciting.
So you have this incredible optimism, positivity that I think is so contagious. My final question is, what does success look like to you?
My idea of success has changed quite a lot over the last few years. I think there was a time when getting the awards and getting the recognition and the 30 under 30 and this, that, and the other was like what I aspired to, or at least what gave me a sense that I was on the right track, that I was succeeding. But what I have learned is that all of those things, they can be taken away very easily, and their meaning can be taken away. But ultimately, it's not what, for me, the work is really about. The work for me is about how am I making sure that I leave the world a better place than I came into it, right? And whether that's creating work like a book or a film or or a speech where I touch people's lives in a particular way, or I give people, the tools or the skills to be, better leaders or more confident in themselves, or take up more space, or go for that opportunity that they might not have. Like the moments where somebody emails me and is like, I got an email a couple of days ago where someone was like, you spoke at my school when I was in grade 12 in the year 2011, I think, right? And he was like, and you probably don't remember me, but your talk changed my life. And I remember that school because it was a really tough school. It was a really hot day. There were a bunch of 15-year-old boys who clearly didn't want to listen to me, but clearly one of them listened enough, because he was like, now I'm learning my fourth language. I'm traveling around the world, and I wouldn't have done those things if you hadn't come into the class and said what you said. And that for me is what success is about, to know that my life has had impact on others. I'm just so grateful that I get to do that work.
Well, long may it continue. Thank you so much for your time, Yassmin.
Thank you.